My name is Seamus Mohan, and this is my presentation on Sufi religious orders. So, first off, what is Sufism? So, it's been described by Sheikh Shahidullah Faridi of the Pakistani Chishtiya Sufi order as the science of the soul. So, it's the element of Islam in which practitioners look inward and they look at their inward practices and rules about their inward spiritual life, as opposed to more often kind of judicial outward views that non Sufi interpretations of Islam may manifest as. So what I've put down is Sufism is best defined as Islamic mysticism, the internal element of Islam through which practitioners seek connection to God in this life rather than the next through fulfilling all of His commandments. It's through connection in this life by being mindful of His presence, and they accomplish this often through asceticism, withdrawing from the outward world, and through taking part in meditative traditions. And what we see on the right here is a Sufi in Muraqaba, which is an Islamic form of meditation. So let's take a look at Sufi orders, which are known as tariqa. They're headed by a murshid, meaning guide, who traces the lineage of student to master back to the Prophet Muhammad. So the murshid of a tariqa will say, "Oh, I was taught by this guy, who was taught by this guy," and the expectation is it goes back and he says, "Oh, and I myself was taught by the Prophet Muhammad." So the knowledge that is being passed down in these Sufi orders is meant to be direct from the source itself, direct from the Prophet Muhammad. And this lineage is called silsila, and for the vast majority of Sufi orders, they trace their silsila back through Ali, who was the fourth caliph in the Sunni interpretation of Islam. The caliph was the leader of the Muslim caliphate. Anyway, members are called muridin, meaning those who desire. To the murid, MRD, that's to desire. So they're called murid. They're called muridin because they desire connection with God. That's what they're in this, tariqah for. That's why they're getting this instruction from the murshid. They're trying to seek that deeper connection to God through this mystic element. So muridin, the members of a tariqah, will come together in meetings called majalis, which literally means council. They're coming as a council together on spiritual matters in buildings called zawiyas, which we would describe as monasteries in the West. And on the right here is the Sidi Qasim al-Jalazi Zawiya, which is in Tunisia. So let's take a look at Sufi practices. All of Sufi life centers around dhikr, which means remembrance of God at all times. And this is often accomplished through muraqaba, which is, as I mentioned before, a Sufi Islamic form of meditation. So muraqaba centers around the repetition of certain phrases called awrad. This is very similar to mantras in kind of Buddhist practices. But what's significant about awrad is that every murid, when they join their Sufi order, receives their awrad from their mentor, from the murshid, like when they join. And they're given these very specific phrases to guide their spiritual development. So it's a very personalized matter, and it's a very instructed matter. And this image we have on the right here is the name of God on a heart. I guess you'd say it's the heart of a believer, heart of the murid. And this represents the practice of dhikr, having God in your heart. So sama is dhikr in action. The word sama refers to all forms of ritualized dhikr, or practices which remind Sufis of God. And one of the most famous ways Sufis practice sama is through dance, particularly the whirling dervishes of the Turkish Mevlevi order. On the left here, we see the whirling dervishes of the Mevlevi tariqa. And this movement that they take part in a very ritualized manner, is their way of remembering God, of practicing dhikr. So Sufism today. While Sufi practices have played a large role in Islam historically, some practices are on the decline today with the rise of Islamic fundamentalists, particularly the Wahhabi persecution of ziyarah. So what this means is the Wahhabi movement within Sunni Islam, Wahhabiyya, arose in Saudi Arabia in around the 1930s. And it's a very, very fundamentalist interpretation of Islam that seeks to kind of strip away what they see as inventions. And many of these include Sufi practices, such as that of ziyarah, which is a Sufi practice of making pilgrimages to the graves of what are called walis, which means like a friend of God. They're basically saints in Sufi practices. And fundamentalists like Wahhabis see this as not permissible, and therefore might often respond with violence. But despite this, Sufism still plays a very major part in the world today. Some major orders include the Naqshbandi, which arose in Central Asia, but it's a very major Sufi order around the world today, and also the Barlevi order, which arose in Southeast Asia, and it focuses around some practices including the intercession of Muhammad, and then with the Naqshbandis, they follow these 11 principles around kind of reforming yourself to orient yourself towards God. So Sufism is very much still a very present force in Islam today. So what I'll close off with is asking, is Sufism really a monastic practice? And what I'll open with is a quote from the Quran itself, from Surah Al-Hadid, ayat 27. Surahs are basically surahs are like the books of the Quran, and ayat are their verses. And here's a quote: "As for monasticism, they made it up. We never ordained it for them, only seeking to please Allah, yet they did not even observe it strictly." And that's a quote, I think it's like the angel Gabriel talking to Noah, or I think. But basically, that's a pretty stern condemnation of basically monasticism as a whole. But as we've seen so far, a lot of the practices that I've outlined that Sufis take part in are very analogous to what we consider monasticism in the West. But there is not really a close analog in Western religion to Sufism as a whole, especially because Sufism, like I quoted earlier, it's the science of the soul. It's a very internal practice, and a lot of muridin, people who join Sufi orders, they can join different orders at multiple times, and a lot of what we would consider in the West as lay people are indeed they would